I had a very specific idea in mind for this drawing, in a very specific scenario too. The idea for this drawing was that she's followed her love interest into their school or university or whatever. She's wearing a really bad disguise with glasses. You know how, like, Superman can put on the glasses and then suddenly nobody can recognize him? That was my thinking for this. She puts on a pair of glasses, she's wearing the correct uniform but in her color palettes, and she's able to sneak past everyone. And it takes the main character a while to even realize that it's her. But as the audience, it's really, really obvious, and that's kind of part of the joke. I will generally draw the line art and then add line weight to it later with another pass through it. Just adding a bit of line weight into the dark corners of the line art to make it look not so flat. I don't worry too much about having perfectly smooth line art. I really feel like by the time I get done coloring everything, adding different effects over the top of the drawing once the coloring is done, you really don't notice any small imperfections in the line art anyway. I already had the sketch done. I don't often record the sketching because it takes me so long. I feel like I'm always changing around ideas with a sketch, changing the pose and adding all these little tweaks, and it ends up usually taking me a while till I've come up with something I'm ready to line. I wasn't sure what background color to use. I started off in this yellow color, and then I played around with a purple color. I did eventually end up deciding on a green color. The character being pink and the background being green gives off a really big contrast of color, but sometimes working with opposite colors like that can be a little tricky. I did a Frankie Stein drawing from Monster High a while back, and that gave me a lot of trouble for that reason. But I'm adding in the floors here. Try to make it look very shiny. I also knew I wanted fog on the ground of the floor to make it look a little spooky, and I also wanted to give a bit of a liminal space vibe to the whole drawing, almost like a dream sequence or something. Like at that very moment, the main character realized that they were being followed and chaos is about to ensue. I added her shadow on the reflective flooring. I also knew I wanted a glowing face in the shadow she's casting on the floor to really help with that liminal space, dream sequence vibe that I was trying to get. I will put on a multiply layer on top of all the colors and put in some rough shadows to give myself a very clear idea of what I want just the main shadows to look like before I get into really rendering the colors. I really think this helps keep all the shadows pretty consistent. The good thing about doing all these different steps on different layers is that, for example, since I do decide to change the background from yellow to green, it's actually quite easy to do because everything's on a separate layer. Once the background is completed, I start on the skin. The skin is a base color, a shadow color, a second shadow color, a blush color, and then a desaturated blue color put into the shadows. I wanted the face to look pretty blushed, with a strong shadow on the top of the face. Light coming from the bottom of the character does usually give off a more crazy looking character, which is what I was going for here. I also placed down shadows with a sharp brush, and then blend it out with a watercolor or blur brush. I'll also use the airbrush for softer shadows as well. Skin for me is always one of the most fun parts to draw. It just seems the most rewarding to me, if that makes sense. Adding some red around the lips, keeping that face very red and blushed looking. The hair coloring is a base color, and then I put in the highlights first. Again, knowing where my highlights are going to go because of that previous multiply layer I did over top of everything. Then adding a shadow color for the hair. I place things down quite messy at first, and then clean them up after. Now I'm adding a second shadow into the first shadow. Using a screen or shine layer right around the face on the bangs can really help lighten things up a bit and draw a lot of attention towards the face. The clothes shading is done with multiply layers. It's generally a lot easier to color clothes this way because you don't have to use so many colors or so many layers for each little part of the clothes. It also helps keep the colors cohesive. I'm using a hard brush and then a watercolor brush or a blur brush to soften things. These are the same kind of steps I take for coloring almost everything. Placing down hard shadows, blurring some of them out. It can be tricky to keep a good amount of hard shadows and soft shadows. Placing my second shadow within my first shadows. It can also be good to sometimes outline your first shadow with the second shadow color. That way you get a bit more contrast between the base color and your shadows. When shading in a multiply layer, you can also alpha lock the multiply layer once you're finished and airbrush it with different kinds of colors if you feel one of the colors is looking a little muddy or something like that. Or if you would like to add a bit of subsurface scattering to anything, so a bit of a bright red color around where the highlight meets the shadows. It is also a good idea to put more attention and detail into the areas that you want to be the focus of your drawing. So in this case, a more detailed face, and then from about the waist down, a little less detail. After all the coloring is done, we can start on After Effects. After Effects are something I do in almost every single drawing. It can differ from each drawing, but if you're not using them, I definitely recommend that you do. All I mean by After Effects is the layers and different blending modes on top of the drawing once you're completely finished coloring. I use Multiply, Shade, and Linear Burn for shadows. I use Add and Shine layers like that for bright colors and highlights. And then for altering colors, I'll use overlays, soft light, hard light, and screen. There's lots of different great videos out there on this subject, and everyone has a slightly different way they like to do this part. I'll post links in the description to some tutorials that I personally really liked on this subject. Just adding lots of different colors, After I'm finished, I always like to do a overpaint layer. So merging everything down into one layer, and then taking my hard brush and adding little details, mostly flyaway hairs. This step can be very subtle sometimes, but I really think it makes a very big difference. I personally find it a lot easier to clean up little errors in an overpaint layer than trying to be very clean in a line art. It seems much faster and a lot more enjoyable. Adding some screen layers over top to brighten things up a bit, also to make the colors a little more cohesive. You can copy and paste the entire drawing once it's finished and play around with the different layer modes to get some really cool effects. I also like to add white dots over the top of everything, kind of like sparkles or bits of glitter or something. Checking the values of the painting by creating a layer over top of everything, filling it in black and setting it to color. After that, we have the finished drawing and the new banner for all my social media accounts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. The clothes shading is done with multiply layers. The clothes shading, oh my,